There is a moment in every athlete's career when the crowd stops watching the score and starts watching the person. For a 21-year-old from the Philippines, that moment has arrived faster than anyone could have predicted right now, across 3 continents. Tournament directors are quietly rewriting their ticketing plans, their court assignments, and even their food menus, all because of one name climbing up the rankings and pulling an entire nation along with her. And if you think that sounds like an exaggeration, wait until you hear what happened in Washington, in Toronto, and now in Cincinnati, because what started as a quiet breakthrough has turned into something the sport has never really seen before, a genuine grassroots wave. Built not by marketing teams or sponsors, but by families, students, workers abroad, and everyday fans who simply refuse to miss a chance to watch her play. That wave has a name attached to it now, Alex Eala, and this is the story of how a player once fighting through qualifying rounds became the reason stadiums sell out in half an hour. Let's rewind for a second and understand just how strange this situation actually is in professional tennis normally. The players who move markets, who force organizers to swap court assignments and expand ticket allocations, are the ones sitting at the very top of the rankings, household names who have been fixtures on television for a decade. But Eala is not that player. At least not yet by the traditional metrics. She is ranked 20th in the world, a fantastic number for someone her age, but nowhere near the very top of the sport, and yet the demand around her matches has started to resemble what you would expect from a reigning Grand Slam champion. That gap between her ranking and her drawing power is exactly what has tournament executives scratching their heads and scrambling to figure out how to plan around her. It started to become undeniable earlier this year in Washington, D.C., at the Mubadala City DC Open, where Eala went on a run that ended with her lifting her first WTA title. In the aftermath, the tournament's own chairman admitted something remarkable. Ticket inquiries tied to her name jumped by at least 80%. And when pressed further, he suggested the real number was probably even higher, close to the entire volume of interest coming from people who wanted to see her. Specifically, not the tournament as a whole, not the other stars in the draw, just her. He revealed that organizers had actually identified this coming wave months earlier, back in early spring, when word started spreading internally that something unusual was building around this young Filipina. They made a deliberate decision to bring her into the tournament, knowing full well what kind of crowd she might pull in. And that bet paid off in a way even they didn't fully anticipate. Then came Toronto. Washington was the spark. Toronto was the moment the fire truly caught, because the National Bank Open, one of the biggest non-major events on the calendar, watched its 10,000-seat center court sell out within 30 minutes of announcing that Eala would be playing there. 30 minutes for a player who is not even a top 10 name. Yet the tournament director did not hide his astonishment, saying flatly that in all his years running the event, he had never witnessed a player outside the top 5 generate this kind of pull. The numbers backed him up completely. Organizers ended up moving her matches away from a smaller grandstand court that seats under 3,000 people, shifting her onto the main stage instead. A decision alone estimated to have generated roughly 5,000 additional ticket sales just from her presence. And if that wasn't enough proof of how seriously the tournament was taking this phenomenon, consider this. For the first time in the history of the event, organizers changed the food being served at the venue, adding chicken adobo and lumpia to the concession offerings specifically to honor her Filipino heritage. The tournament director openly admitted he had never in his career heard of an event adjusting its menu mid-tournament because of a single player's fan base. But here it was, happening in real time. This effect, whatever you want to call it, the Eala wave, the Filipino surge, was not confined to North America either. At the Australian Open earlier in the year, one of the outer courts became so packed with fans hoping to catch her matches that organizers described scenes they had genuinely never dealt with before, with crowds spilling out into the public areas of Melbourne Park just to watch her games on the big screens, creating congestion the grounds simply weren't built to handle. Over in Dubai, Ticket demand for her matches spiked so dramatically that fellow players noticed it firsthand, with Jessica Pegula later recalling that she could actually hear the noise from the crowd echoing all the way back to her hotel room. The courts were positioned so close to where she was staying, which tells you everything about just how loud and how large these gatherings had become. It wasn't just fans. Either some of the biggest names in the sport started weighing in publicly on what they were witnessing, with American star turned media personality Andy Roddick calling it nothing short of a mania, pointing out that watch parties were forming in arenas back home for what was technically just a fourth-round match, and admitting he was completely on board with the energy she was bringing into the sport. Coco Gauff, a multiple-time Grand Slam champion in her own right, offered her own take after facing Eala directly, saying she appreciated how Eala was pulling in an entirely new demographic of fans that tennis simply hadn't reached before. Even after beating her in straight sets during their Dubai matchup, Gauff acknowledged that despite most of the crowd clearly rooting for her opponent, it still meant something significant to her personally to play in front of a packed house after so many years on tour. A small comment that speaks volumes about how rare full stadiums have become for anyone who isn't already a superstar. There's also a quieter, more personal thread running through all of this. Gauff's own doubles partner, whose mother is Filipina, reportedly became one of Eala's most devoted supporters, going as far as preparing traditional dishes like pancit and lumpia specific in her honor. Such a small detail in the grand scheme of ticket sales and sold-out stadiums, but one that captures something the spreadsheets can't. The fact that this isn't just about numbers, it's about people seeing themselves reflected in someone competing on the world's biggest stages. Now let's talk about the physical toll all of this is taking, because attention like this doesn't come free. Eala's schedule over the North American hardcourt stretch has been absolutely brutal. 8 matches packed into 12 days. Spanning 2 different countries, the kind of grind that would wear down even a seasoned veteran, let alone someone still just 21 years old. Navigating her first real taste of superstardom, yet when asked about how she was holding up physically, she didn't complain. She simply expressed gratitude for still being healthy, admitting that staying fit and available for her fans sits right at the top of her priorities every single day, a mindset that reveals a lot about how she is choosing to handle this entire whirlwind. Not with exhaustion or resentment, but with a quiet sense of responsibility. That sense of responsibility became even more visible after her run at Wimbledon earlier this year, a tournament that ended in defeat but left behind one of the most emotional moments of her season. After the match, with tears still visible and the crowd noise still ringing, she made a point of redirecting the conversation away from herself as some overnight sensation and toward the years of unglamorous work that got her there, describing long days spent at the courts from morning until night, framing her success not as luck or a sudden wave of hype, but as the direct result of relentless preparation. She has been consistent about this messaging every time she speaks publicly, always circling back to the idea that her day-to-day discipline is what keeps her centered amid all the noise, and that whatever influence or inspiration she is providing to others is simply a byproduct of that underlying work ethic, not the goal itself. She has also been careful to acknowledge the people standing behind her, framing her rise as something deeply personal even while recognizing the massive outside support she receives, pointing out that it has always been her team and her family putting in the hours alongside her long before anyone outside the Philippines knew her name. That grounded perspective seems to be exactly what is carrying her through this stretch of the season without letting the pressure crack her focus. Heading into Cincinnati, she made it clear she was carrying forward the lessons from her back-to-back weeks in Washington and Toronto, saying she planned to apply everything she had learned from those 2 grueling stretches and sharpen it even further as she moved into Cincinnati and eventually New York. A comment that shows this isn't a player simply riding a wave of popularity, but someone actively trying to turn that momentum into long-term competition. On the subject of what she represents to the Filipino community specifically, she has repeatedly downplayed her own individual importance, describing herself at one point as just a single drop in a much larger ocean of Filipino pride. A humble way of framing her role, but one that misses just how significant that single drop has become, because that ocean keeps expanding every time she steps onto a court, pulling in Filipino families, overseas workers, students living abroad, and professionals from all corners of the globe, all of them crossing borders and rearranging schedules just to watch her compete, turning stadiums thousands of miles from Manila into something that suddenly feels like home turf. Now let's get into what's actually happening in Cincinnati, because her arrival there marks a genuinely new chapter in her season, with organizers placing her as the 17th seed in the draw, the highest seeding of her entire career at a WTA 1000 level event. To put that jump into perspective, just months earlier, in Washington, she wasn't seeded at all, forced to fight through the draw against the very best players in the world with no cushion whatsoever by the time Toronto rolled around. She had climbed to the 25th seed. Now in Cincinnati, she has jumped even further to 17. A direct reflection of her career-high ranking of 20th in the world and the growing respect she has earned from the rest of the tour. With that 17th seed came a privilege she had never experienced before in her career: first round bye, meaning she would not have to fight through an opening match just to stay alive in the tournament. Instead, getting valuable extra time to recover from the physical demands of Toronto before diving back into competition. She herself acknowledged how far this journey has taken her, admitting that while she has come a long way, she still has plenty of distance left to travel, a mindset that seems to define her entire approach to this breakout season. The field she's walking into in Cincinnati is stacked with talent, headlined by world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka alongside major contenders like Elena Rybakina, Jessica Pegula, Coco Gauff, and Naomi Osaka. Interestingly, Eala finds herself grouped in the same section of the draw as Pegula, the very player she defeated back in the Washington final to claim her first career title, setting up a potential rematch storyline that tennis media outlets are almost certainly going to obsess over as the tournament progresses. But beyond the seeding and the bracket placement, there's a bigger story unfolding here, because her rise this season has been nothing short of remarkable on paper alone, climbing an incredible 123 spots in the world rankings, moving from outside the top 140 all the way up to number 20. A jump most players never experience across an entire career, let alone within a single season. Along the way, she made history by becoming the first Filipina ever to earn a seeded position in a Grand Slam main draw, achieving that milestone at Wimbledon. Now she's carrying that same trailblazing status into a WTA 1000 event, standing shoulder to shoulder with some of the most recognizable names the sport has ever produced. As she walked out for her Cincinnati debut, there was an undeniable sense that she was carrying more than just her own competitive ambitions onto the court. She was carrying the collective hopes of an entire diaspora scattered across the globe. Yet even with all of that weight on her shoulders, she continues to describe her role with the same humility she's shown all season, expressing how honored she feels to represent her country and how grateful she remains for the overwhelming support pouring in from Filipino communities everywhere, a support system that has quite literally reshaped how tournaments plan their operations, from moving matches to bigger courts to adjusting concession menus to accommodate the wave of new fans showing up specifically because of her. What makes all of this so fascinating from a broader perspective is that this phenomenon has stopped being just a tennis story, has become something closer to a cultural moment, a genuine case study in what representation can do when it finally shows up on a stage this big. Because this isn't a story about marketing budgets or manufactured hype, it's about a community that has been waiting to see one of their own competing at the very highest level of a sport that historically hasn't had much visibility in the Philippines. And now that she's here, delivering results and doing it with humility and consistency, that community has mobilized in a way tournament organizers were completely unprepared for, forcing them to adapt in real time. Whether that means moving matches to accommodate 10,000 extra fans or adding a few new items to a concession stand menu that hadn't changed in years. Looking ahead, the stakes are only going to get higher, because after Cincinnati wraps up, the tennis calendar moves directly into the U.S. Open, the final Grand Slam of the year, held right in Flushing Meadows. Given the momentum she's carrying into that event, given the breakthrough season she's already put together, and given just how much attention now follows her wherever she goes, There is a very real chance that New York could become the biggest stage yet for this ongoing story. She has already signaled her intention to keep building on everything she's learned from this brutal stretch of tournaments, saying she plans to take the lessons from these past 2 weeks and apply them even more effectively as she moves into both Cincinnati and New York, a clear sign that she views this entire run not as a peak to be enjoyed, but as a foundation to keep building from. So where does that leave us right now, watching a 21-year-old who has gone from unseeded wildcard entries to a career-high 17 seed at a major hardcourt event in the span of about 18 months, who has forced organizers on 3 different continents to rethink how they plan for a single player's presence, who has become the subject of praise from established champions and outspoken commentators alike, and who, somehow, through all of it, keeps returning to the same grounded message about hard work, gratitude, and representing something bigger than herself. If her trajectory over the past year is any indication of what's coming next, then whatever happens in Cincinnati is unlikely to be the peak of the story. It's far more likely just another chapter in a much bigger one, and if you've been following her journey up to this point, you already know that betting against her at this stage would be a serious mistake, because every single time the pressure has ramped up, she has found a way to the entire tennis world, along with millions of fans scattered across the globe, is watching closely to see exactly how far this remarkable run can actually go.